in the study of corruption, which hasn't really taken off, but people talk about forensic economics, which is like, using economics tools and models to sort of back out criminality or detect criminality. So it's like forensic accounting. So we have to be very, very creative in measuring. So there are these indices, like Transparency International, very often relies on surveys. They'll survey people and get a sense what country experts, experts on a certain country think corruption levels are. They'll survey business people and say, what do you think the level of corruption is? But it's hard to know exactly how to interpret those because it's not really hard data as much as an impression. And I think the big concern with those data among academics, among researchers, is simply that maybe when things are going well economically or politically, we kind of overlook corruption. So people make the following calculation: oh, this country's booming, the economy's doing so well, corruption can't be that bad. But of course, that's not an objective measure of corruption. That's endogeneity. And that sort of endogeneity would contaminate measures. So there's a lot of concerns. Do you have a question? Yeah. They're more like accept it or deal with it, right? So again, economic conditions sort of really affect people's perceptions of it and how big a deal it is and whatnot. So that's very important. So let me just talk about 3 very active research questions. We're going to focus on 2 of them today in the next lecture. The first question is, how much does corruption actually affect economic and political development? How much of a hindrance is it? And there is some research on this, but again, it's plagued to some extent by lack of data. There are major counterexamples. People who say corruption hinders development. You can't develop if there's tons of corruption. We can point to so many countries for which all the official statistics say there's just tons of corruption. There's tons of corruption in China. There's tons of corruption in India, all the way from low-level bureaucrats all the way up to high-level government officials. And these countries, China's been growing 10% a year. So I was just saying in the newspaper yesterday that the head of the high-speed train authority in China was enriching himself. A high-speed train contract, these are like multi-billion-dollar sets of contracts. That's a pretty good place to be corrupt. Just skim half of 1% off, and you'll zoom right to wealth. And on and on. Same thing with India, but these countries are growing very rapidly. So there's plenty of counterexamples if you to the claim that you can't grow if you're corrupt. The second research question, which is really a measurement question, has to do with assessing how widespread corruption is, or corruption of a particular form. And again, it's hard to measure because it's illegal, so when we talk about it, we have to be a little more creative. So I'll give you an example of that creativity. My co-author on the book Economic Gangsters, Ray Fissman, has a really great paper, and we talk about some of this in the chapter on corruption, where he wanted to get at how much fraud there was at customs booths. So it's typically claimed that, I'm a customs official, I can do pretty well by, imagine there's an export tax. I'm the customs official, there's an export tax of 50%. You come to me with your shipment of food, frozen food that you're going to export, and there's an export tax. I tell you, look, pay me only 10%, and I'll let it go through. We basically won't search your truck. Or we'll check off that there was only this other product in your truck. It's pretty simple to do if you're the customs official. And then the question is how much of that actually happens. So Ray had a really great idea. And he said, well, it's interesting. The incentives for misreporting, if there's an export tax, really only occur among the exporter. If there isn't the equivalent, say, import tax, when you drive your truck off the other side of the border, you better just declare what you have. There's nothing to be gained by lying because you don't have to pay an import tax. Let them search your truck. It's all legal. It's fine. There's a 2% import tariff. No big deal. So he finds cases where you have export tax but not import tariffs, and vice versa, and just looks at the official trade statistics between pairs of countries in those very specific commodities. And you find this amazing finding, which is when there is a large export tax but no import tax, there's all these mysterious imports that appear out of nowhere. They were never exported out of country A, but they just appear in country B. And it's incredibly strongly correlated with the rate of the tax. And you can say for every percent you raise the tariff, X% of the frozen chicken disappears. And vice versa. So, you have to be creative, but if you think enough and you know the data, you can actually do forensic. This is forensic economics. This is what an accountant would do if they're looking at money laundering or something like that. So that's an example. The final question is, what are the causes of corruption? And once we understand the causes, we can make some progress in trying to control it. We can't try to control it if we don't know what's causing it to begin with. And here there's a wide-ranging debate about how much legal reforms can control corruption, how much the incentives of bureaucrats can reform corruption. There's a claim that's often made that if you have well-paid bureaucrats or well-paid customs officials, they're going to be less likely to be corrupt because they don't want to lose their job. Those claims are often made by the bureaucrats and the customs officials themselves, so you can kind of wonder about that. Or cultural norms. And this is what I'm going to talk about in what's in the chapter in the book and some work that Ray and I did together. Are there social norms or cultural norms that reinforce corruption? So for instance, you might say, what are these cultural norms? What do you mean? If the expectation is that somebody's going to ask me for a bribe, I may just offer it to begin with, because it'll save time, and I won't have to negotiate with them, and they won't harass me. If I know for sure that when I go get my passport renewed, I need to slip you a $100 bill, let me just slip it right away and not waste anybody's time. And then if the person in the bureau, the person behind the desk managing the passports, knows, they expect me to pay the $100 bill, they're going to be pissed if I don't pay the $100 bill, and that's a cultural equilibrium. There's just a set of norms where I expect something, you expect something, and everything works much more smoothly if we conform. In contrast, if we both expected something different, I would really stand out by trying to pay you a bribe. So that's the kind of aspect of the norms we're talking about. So today in the next lecture, we're going to talk mainly about 2 and 3. 1 is obviously very important, and hopefully the grain storage example gives you some illustration of how important corruption can be in this very micro sense in one village. But of course, it could be important at much larger scales. Okay, so in talking about culture and talking about how cultural norms are important, this is actually something that a number of African leaders have latched onto. So in Sierra Leone, which is a country we're going to talk about a bit in the next few weeks, the current president, who just won re-election, has actually created what is called the Secretariat for Attitudinal and Behavioral Change. That sounds a little scary. And its goal from the website is to promote development by changing norms regarding corruption, rule-breaking, indiscipline, and tardiness. I did not make up any of this language. So the claim here is there are social norms regarding corruption or rule-breaking that are holding Sierra Leone back. And the goal of this secretariat is to change those norms. And how do they do that? They have messages on TV and radio. The president makes speeches calling on people to be honest and trustworthy and non-corrupt. Of course, his regime has been caught in massive corruption scandals. There are billboards, and there's a revised citizenship education curriculum in textbooks. So these are a pretty interesting collection of approaches. And of course, the question is, what impact is this going to have? I think people in Sierra Leone look at this with a little bit of curiosity. I'm not sure how seriously it's impacting behavior or attitudes, but it's an attempt. So this is actually a quote from President Koroma saying, knowing what we inherited, having gone through post-independence trauma, the bitterness of war, Sierra Leone had a terrible civil war, and knowing what we've been endowed with as a nation, I'm convinced that all we need is a change of attitudes for us to lift this nation up. We can't rise up above the character of our people. So he's putting culture absolutely at the center of economic development, much more than almost any social scientist or researcher would. But here's a president of a country saying, look, it's all us. If we change our norms, we can do it. It's a little bit like a self-help pep talk. What do people think of this? Is this totally wacky, or is there something to this? Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about changing manufacturing.
So you said this is an A factor from, is that so like in our initial growth model? That's right. If the attitudes are better, factors of production are going to be utilized more efficiently. Okay?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously this could not be a cure-all, but saying that this could be has a positive impact, and it's something that is completely within stereotypes control. There's a lot of factors, a lot of factors that can control when you control this. It's not a great strategy.
Okay, any other thoughts or reactions, Ashley?
I'm not against that. I think it works. It works very much on one level of Ethereum. Just from personal knowledge of people who work in Ethereum, there's just so much revenue going into mining.
Yeah.
And that's how things are millions of money develop.
Right.
Whereas local police officers might keep you from the one, that's not costing the government. The magnitude is so different. And so the attitudinal change is important for a lower magnitude, but I think for the higher magnitude,
It hasn't changed it.
you have to change other things.
Yep. Is there another hand? Yep.
I spent a couple years working in Moldova, which is renowned worldwide as one of the least happy places in the world. Like it's listed in numerous studies books as one of the least happy places in the world. And I think something where I agree with John. The things that you can change is at present you can believe all this change culture. I think at least one country where that would be huge.
I see. Okay. So there's 2 points here in assessing this. One is, does this stuff matter? And 2 is, can we change it? So it might matter. It might be central. Social norms could be critical to development and critical to all kinds of social outcomes. A lot of people think that they have at least some role. The second is, can we change them? And will speeches be enough, or do you need to do more? Although maybe things like civic education and whatnot in the long run do lead to some change. So this is the question: how successful is this going to be? Can we root out corruption, or if we're trying to root out corruption, would it just be much better to put the effort and the money and the time into better legal enforcement? I mean, where should we put our limited resources? Cracking down on corrupt people by having a kind of crack police and investigative unit, or developing a civic curriculum and making speeches? Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily be choice though, because it seems like
Yeah.
if you're a super corrupt government talking about the importance of not being corrupt,
Yeah.
versus
Yeah, you lose a little legitimacy
yeah,
when that happens.
It's almost like enforcement is an obvious thing to do. So it's like if you were a government cares about corruption, you focus on enforcement and say, look at what we're doing.
Yeah.
We're GG.
So let me mention an example, which is not an African example, but we talk about in the book. And we talk about in the book just because it's an anecdote. We don't have really hard data, but the newspaper accounts and the journalistic accounts of this case are actually pretty favorable. So we look at the case of this one mayor in Bogota, the capital of Colombia, named Antanas Mocus, who was a professor. He was, I think, a philosophy professor in a university in Bogota, who ran for mayor as a sort of outsider, anti-politician, very quirky, intellectual guy. He ended up winning. Now, part of the reason he won is Bogota at this time had the highest murder rate in the world. The sort of drug wars of the 80s and early 90s were still going on. People were desperate in many ways, and it wasn't just murder rates that were high. The crime rates in general were extremely high. People were looking for something different. And Mocus, I think, appealed to people because he made claims like Coroma. He said, no, to change, we need to change our civic attitude. We need to change our sense of ourselves. And if we change our culture, everything's possible. So it sounds kind of mysterious and magical, but that was one of the things he did. And he set out to start changing the culture of rule breaking and corruption and criminality with very small things. He decided to target traffic violations, running red lights, running stop signs, very small things. And he did it in a totally wacky and creative way. And the way he did it is he actually hired students from the theater school in the university he came from, dressed them up as mimes, people that don't talk and wear like leotards. I won't do an impersonation now. I left my leotards at home. And he set them out on the major intersections in Bogota, armed with red cards they could flash at people who were jaywalking, running stop signs, just these minor traffic offenses. This is a city with the highest murder rate in the world, and he's out there sending mimes to chase people who are jaywalking. What is this? This guy's crazy. But the amazing thing that all the journalistic accounts say is this actually worked. Now all of a sudden you're about to jaywalk and you're like, I don't want to be ridiculed. Social norms were flipped around. People started thinking about what was right and wrong because social pressure now went against breaking the rules. I was at a conference in Bogota a few years after this, and I have to admit, I was very careful when I crossed the street. I did jaywalk once or twice, but there were no mimes around, and it was fine. It turns out that during his period as mayor, not only did jaywalking fall, there was a big drop in lots of crime. Murder, gun violence, kidnapping. Bogota had some of the most dramatic declines in crime across all these different categories. He did a bunch of other things. He tried to increase civic pride in the city. He started getting some of Colombia's famous artists to build art installations in the poorest slum areas of the city and put libraries there and do all kinds of public and civic investment in poor areas to signal that people there belong to the same city and the same society as everybody else. There were big investments in public transit, etc. Things turned around really quickly. Now, this is where the complementary, someone mentioned how these mutually exclusive, and they're not. So in addition to mine-based interventions, he had more traditional incentive-based interventions. So to get guns off the streets, he did gun buyback programs. He said, I'm going to pay you to get guns out of your hands. But he's basically shown, he ran for president of Colombia a few years ago and lost, he was in the runoff, but he's a very unusual, quirky guy. There was a water shortage in the city of Bogota at one point, so he filmed a public service ad of himself from the waist up in the shower, turning on the water, soaping himself with the water off, so like a 50-something-year-old man, and saying, I don't run the water when I soap myself. So you can see this guy is like a completely interesting, basically a social entrepreneur. He's someone that understands his own culture well enough that he knows what buttons he needs to push to get people to pay attention. So it's not clear that necessarily having President Coroma and Sierra Leone film an ad naked from the waist up would work, but in the Colombian context it worked. So what happened in Bogota? That massive drop in crime in the 90s, was that driven by all these cultural changes, civic changes, and a change in attitude, or was it driven by the gun buyback program and all the police reforms? Which one was it? He was doing both at the same time. Maybe they reinforced each other, or maybe one was really doing all the work. That's a tricky question, and it ties into this broader debate about how you change how you reduce corruption and change cultural norms. You actually need better legal enforcement to change cultural norms. We know to some extent that legal enforcement is dependent on cultural norms, but at the same time, the laws create norms or condition us to think that certain things are acceptable or unacceptable. So there's an equilibrium phenomenon. We'd expect that places with strong law-abiding norms might also have very strong enforcement precisely because these things reinforce each other. Let me pause and see if people have any questions. Are there any Colombians in the room who can attest to? Anybody from Bogota in the room? Okay. Yeah.
I was wondering how long was the red thing?
The red cards? I think for a short time. I think it was like an attention-getting activity.
So is that enough to kind of, was that enough even though it was like a good offense? Was that time span enough to create that multiple?
I don't know. I think that's the open question. There was another hand? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking that all these ideas are kind of like that was very creative and all that such people are actually tackling corruption and stability.
Yeah.
But I was just thinking, most of the time we have like the biggest problems with corruption are part of large scale scandals within the government.
Right. Most of which presumably we're never hearing about.
Yeah. So would these measures really help to tackle those huge
That's the question. To the extent, I mean, this point was raised. There's sort of petty rule breaking and corruption, and then there's this like mass fraud and theft. And is this going to be enough to deal with the high level stuff? I think that's the open question. Do you have a follow up, or did you have a follow up on it?
Yeah, I mentioned that also.
Yeah.
If there are problems with the police taking bribes and that sort of thing. Maybe the problem is it goes back a step further, which is the police maybe not being paid enough. Or some issues.
Yeah, that's right. That's the argument that's often made. If salaries were high enough, government officials wouldn't need to be corrupt. Something like that. Yeah.
And I was just thinking about the scale of the corruption involved.
Yeah.
If you change the local norms or the mindset of people, even the small scale, in the long run, it may have a better.
Yeah. These are all open questions, and my feeling is they're not very well understood. And disentangling these things is a difficult logical problem, econometric problem, and statistical problem. And next time we'll talk about 1 attempt through work of Ryan Ray Fissis to shed light on some of these issues in one case. We'll talk about that on Tuesday, and I'm going to post a problem set tonight.